My parents created a fake medical emergency to steal my $15,000 wedding fund to fund my brother's honeymoon, so I married in secret and bankrupted them afterwards. Hey, so I, 26F, recently got married to my husband, 26M, after a 6-year-long relationship. We had an intimate ceremony at his aunt's farmhouse property, which is not what we had in mind initially at all. I had actually wanted to get married on the beach because that's where some of our happiest memories are. My husband and I are both water babies and would make a trip to the beach at least once a month to unwind and let loose, so it's a special place for us. I had even started looking for hotels where we could all stay. Like literally any other bride on this planet, I wanted my wedding to be special, and I had even been saving money to have a huge celebration for the last 5 years. I work in advertising and get paid decently, but my husband and I used to live modestly and tried our best to save money for the future. We had been planning to book one of the best hotels with a sea-facing view so our guests could really have a fantastic time, and it was meant to be a luxurious experience. However, we had to change our plans and scale down considerably because my parents decided to borrow money from me a couple of months ago, and I couldn't bring myself to decline. Some context here: my brother, 24M, also got married a couple of months ago, but it had been sudden for him, and they didn't plan much. He had been with his wife for about 2 years and proposed to her just a month before they got married. It was a really small ceremony with just family and a few friends, but I was happy for him since it was their wedding, their choice. A few weeks after the wedding, my mother reached out to me and asked to borrow $15,000. She told me that my father had fallen ill all of a sudden and said that it was probably his diabetes acting up again. She couldn't bear all the medical expenses by herself and needed me to help her. She told me that there was a special medicine that the doctors had suggested, but it cost a lot of money since it had to be imported, and their insurance didn't cover it. I was really concerned for my father's health, so I decided to step up and lend her the money, no questions asked. I paid him a couple of visits and asked my mother to show me the medical report several times, but she always managed to evade those questions. Whenever I would visit them, my dad was always in bed, but for some reason, he just didn't appear very sick. Even when I asked my mother why he hadn't been moved to the hospital so he could be observed and kept under professional care, she told me that it wasn't necessary at the moment. But somehow, he was sick enough to need to be administered an uncommon medicine that they didn't produce here and wasn't even covered by their insurance. I'm not an idiot. After the first few visits, I had figured out that something very fishy was going on with my parents, but I didn't want to accuse them of anything before I was sure. It would be a really bad look for me if I accused them of lying to me about a medical emergency just to borrow money, and then it all turned out to be true after all. I realized that my brother hadn't been visiting our parents, and even when I would ask them why he wasn't there, my father would tell me that they didn't want him to worry because he was just so young and they wanted him to be focused on his work. Yet, they were fine with me being worried sick about them. I did speak to my brother about it on a phone call after a couple of weeks had passed, and he still hadn't visited our father. He told me that he would drop by as soon as he came back from his honeymoon. That was news to me because I had no idea that he had already left for his honeymoon. My parents hadn't told me, and neither he nor his wife had posted about this on their social media either, so I had no clue where he was. When I asked him why he hadn't told me, he said that he had been planning to surprise everybody by coming back after a month of being MIA with a bunch of photos, stories, and memories from their trip around Europe. He said that he had no intention of telling me either, but he had been quite concerned when I said that our father was sick, which is why he found it necessary to reply to me. He told me that he had spoken to our parents after he received my alarming text, but they had told him that he had nothing to worry about and they were doing just fine. He told me that our parents had probably just exaggerated the situation while talking to me, and I had believed it because I was kind of emotional, which had led to a misunderstanding. I tried to give my parents the benefit of the doubt by forcing myself to believe that maybe they had been hiding the truth from my brother because they didn't want to ruin his honeymoon or get him all worried about them. I knew what I had seen at my parents' house, and there had been no scope for a misunderstanding. But then my brother mentioned to me that he would have felt really guilty about not being there for Dad if what I had said about him being very sick turned out to be true because apparently, our parents were the ones funding his insanely expensive and long honeymoon. All the warning bells started going off in my head, so I asked him exactly how much this trip was going to cost him. He told me that this trip was going to cost our parents at least $12,000 to $15,000 because he and his wife were pulling out of all the stops and really making the most of their honeymoon by living in the most expensive hotels and eating at the best restaurants because they can only do this once. They would also be shopping for a lot of stuff, and even that was going to be covered by our parents. I knew instantly that this was where my money was going and that there was no medical emergency at all. There never had been any emergency to speak of, and that's why they had no documents to show me and had never even been at the hospital. My parents had just invented that whole story because they wanted the money to fund my brother's honeymoon, and that was supposed to be their wedding gift. I felt extremely betrayed while hearing my brother brag about how our parents were going above and beyond for him just so the two of them could enjoy their honeymoon since they hadn't been able to have a grand wedding. The money that I had lent to my parents was from my wedding fund, and I felt like I had been stabbed in the back when I realized that my parents had given it all away to my brother. When I confronted them after that phone call, my parents told me that they had to cook up some story because they knew that I wouldn't give them the money if I knew that it was going to be used by my brother for his honeymoon. They told me that he had been struggling at work and had been down for a long time, so they wanted him to have some fun without having to worry about money. Unfortunately, they couldn't fund it themselves because that would endanger their own retirement fund, so they had to borrow money from me. Their reasoning was that I was still young and earning and had a lot of years ahead of me where I could work and earn this money back, but it was not the same for them. They also said that it was just money and they would return it at some point, but for now, I just needed to put myself second and think about my brother's feelings because this honeymoon had apparently rejuvenated him and rescued him from getting depressed. I couldn't believe it because this meant that I would have to cut down on my wedding expenses for no reason. Just to be clear, I had been okay with the idea of having a smaller wedding as long as it meant that my father's health wouldn't suffer, but this was not something that I had signed up for.